Arthur was 52 years old. For 25 of those years, he had built things that were meant to last. He was a structural engineer, a man who understood stress loads and shear walls, the quiet integrity of reinforced concrete, and the slow, inevitable fatigue of steel. He had applied the same principles to his life: consistency, patience, and an unwavering belief in solid foundations. He had built a career, a home, and a marriage of 2 decades with the same methodical care he used to design an overpass. Then the foundation of his marriage revealed a flaw he had not anticipated. His wife, Lena, after 22 years, announced she needed to discover a version of herself that did not exist in the shadow of his quiet stability. The separation was swift and, on the surface, amicable. Arthur, a man who preferred to reinforce structures rather than demolish them, ceded ground for the sake of peace. He gave her the house he had designed, the one with the garden they had planted together. He gave her more than half of their liquid assets, a figure she and her lawyer had deemed fair. He moved into a small apartment overlooking a rail yard and went back to work. For 2 years, he worked. He took the projects no one else wanted: the complex, overnight retrofits, the remote site inspections, the jobs that required more grit than glory. He worked with the same quiet diligence he had always possessed, only now the work was the entire structure, not just a part of it. He saved his money, invested it with the same caution he used to calculate seismic risks, and finally, he did something for himself. He bought a boat. It was not a supercar or a flashy indulgence. It was a 44-foot trawler yacht, a vessel built for endurance, not speed. He named it the Level one Saturday afternoon. A photo of him on the boat, taken by his brother, appeared online. 2 weeks later, Lena appeared at his apartment. She was not alone. Beside her stood a man in a suit that cost more than Arthur's first car, a lawyer named Brolin whose confidence was a tangible force in the small hallway. They had a document, a motion to reopen the divorce settlement, alleging fraudulent concealment of marital assets. They wanted half the value of the yacht. Arthur listened, his face betraying nothing. He did not invite them in. When Brolin finished his summary of threats and legal avenues, Arthur simply nodded. He looked at Lena, at the woman who had shared his life, and saw a stranger calculating angles of attack. He said nothing. He closed the door, not with a slam, but with the quiet, solid click of a well-fitted lock. Then he walked to the small closet that served as his office, past the neat stacks of blueprints and city codes, and took a single, matte black external hard drive from a fireproof box. Tell us where you're watching from in the comments, and be sure to subscribe for more stories like this one. Arthur's life had a rhythm defined by the properties of materials. He woke at 4:30 in the morning, not because an alarm told him to, but because his internal chronometer was set to the quiet hours before the sun rose, the best time to review structural plans without interruption. The air in his apartment was cool and still, smelling faintly of brewed coffee and the clean scent of plotter paper. He would sit at his drafting table, a relic in a digital age, and study the intricate dance of forces and loads. He found a deep satisfaction in it, the search for a perfect equilibrium. This was the world he understood. It was a world of knowable stresses, of calculable risks. A steel beam could be trusted. Its tensile strength was a fixed and verifiable fact. Concrete, if mixed and cured correctly, would hold for a century. These were the certainties upon which he had built his career. His marriage to Lena had once felt like such a certainty. They had met in college. He was studying engineering, she was studying art history. He was drawn to her vibrancy, the way she could fill a room with color and conversation, a stark contrast to his own reserved nature. He was the foundation. She was the architecture that made the structure a home. For 2 decades, it had worked. He provided the stability, the steady income from his increasingly senior roles at a large civil engineering firm. He managed the long-term investments, the retirement accounts, the slow accumulation of wealth. Lena managed their life. She curated their home, their social circle, their vacations. She was brilliant at it. Their house was a masterpiece of comfortable elegance. Their parties were legendary, and their friends saw them as the ideal couple, the steady, reliable husband and the charming, effervescent wife. Arthur had never questioned the division of labor. He found joy in her happiness, in the life she built upon the foundation he provided. He worked. He came home. He listened to her stories about gallery openings and charity luncheons. He assumed their goals were aligned. The first sign of a structural issue was almost imperceptible. It was not a dramatic crack, but a subtle shift in resonance. Lena began to talk about her life in the past tense. She spoke of passions deferred, of roads not taken. She started a book club that met 3 times a week. She took a pottery class that required long weekends away at a retreat. Arthur supported it all. He believed that a strong structure must allow for a degree of flexion. But the distance grew. The shared space of their evenings became a quiet expanse of silence, filled only by the rustle of her art magazines and the soft scratching of his pen on a blueprint. Her phone, once left carelessly on the kitchen counter, was now always in her pocket or face down on the nightstand. He noticed these things not with suspicion, but with the dispassionate observation of an engineer noting a change in soil composition. It was data. Its meaning was not yet clear. The end, when it came, was as performatively gentle as it was ruthlessly efficient. Lena sat him down in their sun-drenched living room, the one with the paintings she had chosen, and spoke of a need for personal authenticity. The words were pulled from self-help books he'd seen on her nightstand. She said it wasn't about him. It was about her. She felt she had become an extension of his life, a decorative element on a structure he had designed, and she needed to be her own architect now. There was no mention of anyone else. Arthur, disoriented by the sudden demolition of his life's central pillar, did not fight. He was an expert in stress analysis, but the emotional torsion of that conversation left him unable to calculate a response. He was in a state of shock, a kind of structural failure where all the load-bearing elements give way at once. Her lawyer, a woman with a warm smile and a portfolio of aggressive victories, drafted the agreement. It was presented as a fair and equitable dissolution. Lena would get the house. As her entire life and social fabric were centered there, she would get a significant portion of their savings and investments to ensure a stable transition into her new, independent life. Arthur, still reeling, focused only on the finality of it. He wanted the pain to stop. He signed the papers in a sterile conference room, the scent of carpet cleaner and quiet desperation hanging in the air. He felt as though he were signing off on the controlled demolition of a building he had spent a lifetime constructing. He moved his few personal belongings, his books, his drafting tools, his clothes, into a generic apartment complex by the freight lines. The mournful sound of the train horns at night became the soundtrack to his grief. He did not see Lena again for nearly a year. He heard through mutual acquaintances that she had a new partner, a wealth manager named Julian who was wonderfully spontaneous. He heard they had traveled to Tuscany, that they were renovating the kitchen in the house he had designed. Each piece of news was a small aftershock, a reminder of the seismic event that had reshaped his world. He processed his grief the only way he knew how. He went to work. He poured every ounce of his focus and discipline into his projects. He took on the Kensington overpass retrofit, a nightmare job that involved reinforcing a crumbling, 50-year-old concrete artery over a live highway, with all work to be done between the hours of midnight and 4 in the morning. For 18 months, his life was a cycle of nocturnal labor, daytime sleep, and the constant, grinding noise of concrete saws and rivet guns. The project was brutal, but the pay included a substantial completion bonus. It was this bonus, earned through sleepless nights and exposure to the elements, that formed the bulk of the funds for the boat. He had never hidden it. It was post-divorce income, earned long after the final decree was stamped by the court. He had assumed that was the end of it. He had assumed the documents he signed meant what they said. He had underestimated the tensile strength of greed. The silence in his apartment after Lena and her lawyer left was absolute. It was a dense, heavy silence, broken only by the low hum of the refrigerator. Arthur stood motionless in the center of the room for a long time, his hand still resting on the doorknob. He was not angry. The emotion that settled over him was colder, more precise. It was the feeling an engineer gets when reviewing the wreckage of a collapsed bridge and identifying the exact point of failure. It was a moment of unwelcome, painful clarity. He walked to the window and looked down at the rail yard. A freight train was slowly shunting cars, the metallic clang of couplings echoing in the afternoon air. He watched the deliberate, methodical process. One car at a time, connected, secured, moved into place. This was a language he understood. He began an inventory, not of his possessions, but of his knowledge. Fact 1. Lena was demanding half the value of a post-marital asset. Fact 2. She had brought a lawyer, Brolin, who specialized in high-conflict divorces, which meant this was not a casual inquiry. It was a planned assault. Fact 3. Their legal claim was likely predicated on the idea that he had hidden the funds for the yacht during the divorce proceedings. Fact 4. This premise was false. He took a deep breath. The pressure in his chest was immense, a compressive force that threatened to buckle him. He did not allow it. He mentally segregated the emotional response from the logistical problem. The grief and the sense of betrayal were real, but they were non-structural elements for the moment. They could be dealt with later. The immediate issue was the legal threat, the attack on his integrity. It was a problem to be solved, a faulty design to be analyzed and countered. He went to his small kitchen, filled a glass with water, and drank it slowly. He could feel the cool liquid trace a path down his throat, a small, anchoring sensation in the midst of the turmoil. He thought about the divorce agreement. He had read it a dozen times before signing, but his focus then had been on the emotional pain, not the fine print. He remembered a clause, something about full financial disclosure and a waiver of all future claims. Section 7, subsection B. It was boilerplate, but it was there. He walked back to the closet and retrieved the fireproof box. Inside, beneath his passport and the title to his car, was a folder containing his copy of the finalized divorce decree. He opened it and found the passage. Both parties hereby affirm that they have provided a full and transparent accounting of all marital assets and debts, and waive any and all future claims on the other's current or future income, assets, or property, except as explicitly outlined within this agreement. He read the sentence 3 times. The language was clear, unambiguous. It was a firewall. Lena and Brolin were attempting to breach it. He sat down at his drafting table, the hard drive he had retrieved resting next to his keyboard. He plugged it in. The drive whirred to life, a quiet, reassuring sound. It contained the complete archive of his professional life. Every project proposal, every contract, every payment schedule, every bonus memorandum, every single email related to his work for the past 15 years. He did not keep these records out of paranoia. He kept them because it was his nature. He was a man who believed in documentation, in creating a clear and verifiable record. It was how you built a bridge that stood for a century. It was how you defended your work. It was, he now realized, how you defended your life. He made 2 phone calls. The first was to his brother, Marcus. The conversation was short. "I need a recommendation for a lawyer," Arthur said. "Family law? Someone sharp. Someone who doesn't rattle." Marcus, a contractor who understood the value of solid specialists, didn't ask why. He just said, "David Chun. He's the best. I'll text you his number." The second call was to David Chun. He left a brief, calm message, stating his name and the nature of his problem. He said he had all the relevant documentation. He requested a meeting at Mr. Chin's earliest convenience. Then he hung up, opened a new folder on his desktop, and began to build his case, one dated and timestamped file at a time. The process of assembling the evidence was not emotional. It was a meticulous, structural exercise. Arthur worked through the night, fueled by black coffee and a cold, clarifying sense of purpose. He began by creating a timeline, a master document that would serve as the central load-bearing column for his defense. He started with the date of his legal separation from Lena, then the date the divorce was finalized by the court. These 2 dates were the critical demarcation points, the before and after. Everything that came before was marital property, already divided. Everything that came after was his alone. He accessed his archived bank statements, cross-referencing them with the financial disclosures he had submitted during the divorce. Every account, every asset, every dollar was there, accounted for. He had disclosed everything, from his 401k down to the last $100 in his checking account. He printed the disclosure forms, the ones both he and Lena had signed in the presence of their lawyers, and placed them in a neat pile. The paper was crisp, the signatures clear. They were artifacts of a concluded history. Next, he turned to the hard drive, his professional archive. He isolated the files related to the Kensington overpass retrofit. The project had started 3 months after his divorce was final. He pulled the initial contract, which detailed the scope of work, the timeline, and the payment structure, including the specific terms of the completion bonus. He printed it. He then compiled every pay stub he received during the 18 months of the project. Each one was a testament to his labor, earned while Lena was traveling through Tuscany with her new partner. Finally, he accessed the bonus payment record. It was a single wire transfer from his firm, dated 6 weeks after the project's successful completion. The amount was substantial, and the memo line was unequivocal. Kensington O/P completion bonus. This was the money. This was the source. He tracked that specific deposit into a new investment account he had opened, an account that had not existed during his marriage. He printed the statement showing the deposit. From that account, he traced the wire transfer to the yacht broker. He printed the purchase and sale agreement for the level, the bill of sale, and the final wire confirmation. The chain of custody for the funds was perfect, an unbroken, fully documented path from a post-divorce employment bonus to a post-divorce asset. There were no hidden accounts, no secret funds, no financial deception. There was only a man who had gone to work after his life fell apart. He organized the documents into a precise sequence, a narrative told through official records. Each page was a step in the story, laid out with the logic of a construction plan. The signed divorce decree, the signed financial disclosures, the post-divorce employment contract, the 18 months of pay stubs, the bonus payment confirmation, the new account statement, the purchase agreement for the boat. It was an irrefutable, load-bearing wall of fact. When he was finished, the sun was beginning to cast a pale, gray light over the rail yard. He had not slept. He felt a profound exhaustion, but it was overlaid with something else, the quiet satisfaction of a problem solved. He had examined the flawed claim against him, analyzed its weaknesses, and engineered a defense that was simple, elegant, and unbreakable. He compiled everything into a single, encrypted digital file. He labeled it Project L. David Chin's office was on the 34th floor of a downtown skyscraper. The windows offered a panoramic view of the city, a sprawling tapestry of concrete and steel that Arthur found vaguely comforting. The office itself was minimalist and immaculate. Glass, chrome, and dark wood. No clutter, no wasted space. It was the physical embodiment of a clear legal mind. David Chun was a man in his late 40s, dressed in a perfectly tailored gray suit. He was compact, focused, and moved with an economy of motion that suggested he never made a superfluous gesture. He did not engage in small talk. He shook Arthur's hand, gestured to a chair, and said, "Tell me what happened." Arthur did not tell him a story of betrayal or heartbreak. He presented the facts as he had organized them. He spoke of the divorce, the terms of the settlement, and the recent demand from his ex-wife. His voice was steady, his language precise. He spoke like an engineer presenting a technical briefing. When he was done, he handed David a single flash drive. "Everything is on there," he said. The decree, the financial disclosures from the divorce, and the complete documentation for the source of funds for the asset in question. David inserted the drive into his computer. For the next 20 minutes, the only sound in the office was the soft clicking of his mouse as he navigated the files Arthur had so carefully prepared. He opened the timeline document first, then clicked through the supporting evidence, his eyes scanning each page with intense concentration. Arthur watched his face. It was impassive, but he saw a flicker of something in the lawyer's eyes. Not surprise, but a deep, professional appreciation. It was the look of a master craftsman recognizing the work of another. When David was finished, he leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. He looked at Arthur. "This is the most thorough client file I have ever received," he said. It was not a compliment. It was a statement of fact. "Your ex-wife's claim has no structural integrity. It is built on a faulty premise. They are assuming you are a fool, and they have not done their due diligence. What is our next step?" Arthur asked. "We do nothing," David said. "We wait for them to make the next move. They will file their motion with the court. They will request discovery. They will expect us to be reactive, to scramble. Instead, we will be silent. We will let them expend their resources, build their case on a foundation of sand. Then, at the appropriate moment, we will respond. Not with an argument, but with this." He tapped the flash drive. "This is not a defense. It is a demolition." Arthur felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He had found an ally who spoke his language. Later that day, he called his brother. "I met with Chun," Arthur said. "He's good, I know," Marcus replied. "How are you holding up?" "I'm okay," Arthur said. It's just a problem to be solved. It's more than that. Art, Marcus said, his voice softening. She's trying to burn you. After everything, I know, Arthur said quietly. The acknowledgement was a rare concession to the emotional reality of the situation. But I don't build with flammable materials. It was the closest he could come to describing his own resilience. He was not wood, meant to burn. He was concrete and steel, meant to endure. 2 weeks passed. The formal notice arrived by courier. A thick envelope containing the motion to reopen the divorce proceedings, filed with the family court. It was signed by Lena's lawyer, Jonathan Brolin. Arthur read the document, standing in his kitchen. The legal language was dense, but the core argument was simple. It alleged that the existence of a 44-foot yacht, purchased less than 2 years after the divorce, was de facto evidence of concealed marital assets. The motion painted a picture of Arthur as a cunning, deceptive man who had systematically hidden money to deprive his ex-wife of her rightful share. It spoke of his modest, unassuming lifestyle as a calculated deception designed to mask his true wealth. Arthur felt a strange sense of detachment as he read the words. It was like reading a fictional character study, a person who bore his name but none of his characteristics. The document was an act of architectural revisionism, an attempt to redesign the past to fit a desired future. From Lena and Brolin's perspective, the logic was sound. They saw a quiet engineer who had, in their minds, stumbled into a significant sum of money. Brolin, a man accustomed to dealing with the messy, emotional finances of the wealthy, saw a classic case of hidden accounts. He had built his career on finding such things. He pictured Arthur as a man who had been clever enough to hide the money, but foolish enough to spend it so conspicuously. It was a common pattern. The quiet ones were often the ones who got caught being extravagant. Lena, for her part, had constructed a narrative that justified her actions. She had convinced herself that Arthur had always been secretive about his finances, that his quiet nature was a form of withholding. The yacht was not just an asset, it was proof. It was proof that he had held back, that he had not been a true partner. Her new partner, Julian, a man who lived and breathed the art of financial maneuvering, had encouraged this belief. He saw the situation as a simple asset recovery mission. To them, Arthur's silence after their initial confrontation was a sign of guilt. A man with nothing to hide would have protested, argued, threatened. Arthur's quiet closing of the door was, in their analysis, the action of a man caught off guard, retreating to figure out his next move. They had fundamentally misread their opponent. They had mistaken his stillness for paralysis. They did not understand that an engineer does his most important work in silence, before the first piece of steel is ever moved. While they were drafting motions and building a narrative, Arthur was checking load calculations. David Chin's response to the motion was a masterclass in strategic restraint. It was a simple, 2-page document. It acknowledged receipt of their motion and stated their intention to file a response by the court-mandated deadline. It did not contest any of their points. It did not reveal any of their evidence. It was a blank wall. To Brolin, this was further confirmation of his theory. The other side was stalling, trying to come up with a story. He felt a surge of professional confidence. He advised Lena that they were in a strong position. He told her to remain patient, that the law would eventually compel Arthur to reveal the truth. Lena felt a sense of vindication. She was right. She had been wronged. The money was rightfully hers. She imagined the victory, the settlement that would fund the new life she was building, a life of spontaneity and elegance, unburdened by the quiet, methodical man she had left behind. The meeting was set for a conference room at a neutral law firm, a standard procedure before a court hearing. It was intended to be a final attempt to settle. Arthur arrived 10 minutes early. He wore a simple, dark gray suit, the one he reserved for client presentations. He looked neat, professional, and unremarkable. David Chun arrived a moment later, carrying a slim leather briefcase. They sat on one side of a vast, polished mahogany table that reflected the gray morning light. Lena and Jonathan Brolin arrived exactly on time. Lena wore a cream-colored silk blouse and expensive jewelry. She looked radiant, confident. Brolin was the picture of a successful litigator, from his handcrafted shoes to his perfect hair. He carried a thick accordion file overflowing with papers. They took their seats opposite Arthur and David. The air in the room was thick with unspoken hostility. Brolin began. He spoke for 15 minutes, his voice smooth and authoritative. He laid out their case as presented in the motion. He spoke of a clear pattern of financial obfuscation and a fundamental breach of the good faith required in a marital dissolution. He concluded with an offer. To avoid a costly and embarrassing court battle, Arthur could agree to sign over a 50% ownership stake in the yacht to Lena. If not, they were prepared to file for a full forensic accounting of all his finances, dating back 5 years before the divorce. It was an aggressive opening, designed to intimidate. Throughout the monologue, Arthur remained perfectly still. His hands rested flat on the table. His expression was neutral. He looked at Brolin as if studying a complex but flawed blueprint. When Brolin finished, a heavy silence descended on the room. He looked at Arthur, expecting a response, a denial, an argument. He got nothing. Arthur simply turned his gaze to his own lawyer. David Chen gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. He opened his briefcase and took out a single, slender folder. It contained 7 documents. He did not place the folder on the table. He took out the first document and placed it gently in the center of the polished wood. It was a certified copy of the divorce decree. He slid it across the table toward Brolin. "This is the final decree of dissolution for your client's marriage to mine," David said, his voice calm and even. "I would direct your attention to Section 7, subsection B, which you have both seen. The mutual waiver of all future claims. Signed by both parties." Brolin glanced at it, a flicker of annoyance on his face. "We are aware of the boilerplate, Mr. Chun. Our contention is that the agreement is invalid due to fraudulent disclosure." David Chen nodded slowly. He reached into his folder and took out a second document. He placed it on top of the first. It was the complete financial disclosure statement Arthur had filed during the divorce, the one detailing every last penny he possessed at the time. "This is my client's sworn financial statement, dated 2 months prior to the decree," David said. "I would ask your client, Ms. Vance, if she recognizes her own signature at the bottom, attesting to its accuracy and completeness." Lena leaned forward, her eyes narrowing as she looked at the document. Her signature was there, a familiar, confident scrawl. A knot of unease began to form in her stomach. Brolin, however, remained unfazed. "A document is only as honest as the man who prepared it," he said dismissively. "Our entire case is that this disclosure was incomplete." David Chen's expression did not change. He reached into his folder again. He produced a third document and placed it deliberately on top of the others. It was Arthur's employment contract for the Kensington overpass retrofit. "This is my client's contract for a project he began 3 months after the divorce was finalized," David said, his voice dropping slightly, each word landing with precision. "Please note the date of commencement. And please note the terms of the performance bonus, contingent upon successful completion." Brolin took the document and began to read. The confidence on his face began to recede, replaced by a look of intense concentration. The timeline was becoming problematic. The foundation of his argument was beginning to show hairline cracks. Lena looked from the contract to Arthur, whose gaze remained fixed, patient, and unyielding. The silence in the room deepened. David Chen did not wait for a response. He placed a fourth item on the table. It was not a single document.